Hi students. In this lesson, we'll continue our working with type discussion, specifically focusing on type classifications, a very brief typographic history lesson, talking about typographic tone and personality, how to pair type, and then lastly, creating your fourth spread. Okay, let's talk about different type classifications. There's two standards, which is serif and sans serif typefaces, and then two that are not as commonly used, which is script and decorative typefaces. So a serif is pretty easy to identify, and it has a classical look and feel to it. So it's easy to identify by the letter form having what I like to call like a foot at the bottom here, and the stroke kind of ending with a point. So again, easy to identify by just seeing the feet on the type. In contrast to that is a sans serif typeface, and this has more of a modern look and feel to it. And sans just simply means without, and it does not have that stroke at the bottom or the top of the typeface. So if we jump into a very brief history of type, when we're looking at the serif typeface, again being classic in style, there's a really simple way of thinking about how type connects to two main things. One, it's related to the art period of the time it was created in. And it's also related to what type of printing process was available at that time. So if we look at a classic typeface like Garamond, it was created around the 1500s. And that really relates to the Venetian painting period. So again, how the typeface looks is relative to the art at the time. And then the printing press was invented in the late 14th century. So the printing press, meaning that you would pull down the press and it would print or stamp the actual typography and image together, kind of like a letterpress. If we move on a little bit further, a transitional serif like Baskerville is created around the 18th century. And again, that kind of relates to neoclassical design. And also it has a lot to do with how printing presses, again, what was available at that time. In lithography printing, which means to simply print on a flat surface, and it would create a roll, kind of when newspapers were first created, to be able to actually mass produce books and also newspapers at the time. So again, two things really play a big part is context to the time period, the art that was being created at that time, and how that typeface relates to the art period, and then lastly, what printing processes were available to use with that type at the time. So again, as it transitions, you can kind of see a history timeline with the types of typefaces that were available, and then a kind of drastic transition in the early 20s to the sans serif. And this is really the influence of modern design and modern architecture at the time. And a link on our class Canvas connects us to the International Typographic Style, which is really talking about the Swiss influence on design. And honestly, this was done around the 20s, and it still has a large impact on what we see in the design world and in our world today. So what this style is, in a nutshell, is very clean modernist design that is organized by using a grid, which is a big part of how we put our book together this semester. So again, just kind of understanding in summary that the typographic classifications and the styles, again, relate to the history of type. So let's talk about typographic personality or tone. One of the biggest mistakes I see young designers and illustrators make is the fact that they choose a typeface based on if they think it's cool or if they think it's kind of like fun and playful and like just is edgy. And I don't know if that's the most informed way to make a good choice. So here's how I would like you to think about your typographic decisions based on tone and attitude. So when it comes to choosing the right typeface, the first thing I want you to do is think about the artwork that you're putting the typeface beside. And let's just use this palette of wit. Let's say that your piece of artwork is really witty and really sharp and smart. So the typefaces you choose should have that similar personality. And the way I want you to think about it is just using keywords. If you're looking at a typeface, what's the first word that describes the personality of the type when you look at it? Don't look at it by style. Look at it by its overall tone. So for example, when we look at tungsten here, it's kind of bold and heavy. And the word tough actually represents what that typeface kind of looks like. We have Gotham rounded here, and it actually has kind of a cheeky and playful attitude towards it. And then the last one, Archer, does have this kind of slab serif, kind of innocent, sweet feel to it. So you kind of see when you combine all those together, it has kind of a witty personality. So when you look at the examples here, it kind of breaks down a keyword for each type choice that you make. So that's how I want you to look at typefaces. I don't want you to look at it based on if you think it's cool or if you think it's hip or something that's kind of current, up to date, and what a lot of people maybe have been using and you've seen out there. What I want you to do is think about your artwork, your illustration, the tone and what's happening in that, the overall attitude, and make sure that the typefaces that you choose work in harmony with that and don't contrast it. So let's do a quick review before we talk about pairing type. We've been working with the 4 typographic contrasts in the last few lessons. Those contrasts are size change, weight change, and case between upper and lower case. Our final typographic contrast is face, and that just simply means mixing between 2 different typefaces. So on our class Canvas, we have resources for pairing type, and you'll find that doing type pairings is probably the most challenging to execute for a designer and illustrator. Well, what is really fantastic is that there is a ton of resources out there to help you with making the right choices. So we're specifically going to use Google Fonts. And the reason why we're using Google Fonts is because it's free and there's some really great Google Fonts out there to download. There's 3 main resources that I found, but honestly, if you Google pairing Google Fonts, you'll probably even find more resources. But you can start here, and if you're not in love with any of them, feel free to research even more. So I'm just going to start by clicking the first one. And what you're going to see is a bunch of Google font pairings that you can choose from. And what I want you to do is just quickly jump over to your page designs. And like we talked about before, having a key word or two about the overall illustration and kind of the overall tone of your book will be really key before you come in and start to pick out a bunch of different type pairings. So before you totally get into this, let's just rewind really quickly. Write a few key words down that kind of summarize the overall tone and style of your illustration and of your book. And then when we come to this first example, we want to find a pairing that we think is appropriate to those keywords. I hope that makes sense. But really, you're just trying to find something that matches tone here with the tone of the illustration. So there's quite, I would say, over 100 examples to kind of choose from just on this first website alone. So let's say I'm going to work with my choice number 9. And this is where this website's really fantastic and easy to use. All you have to do is download the font pairing. Go to your Finder in your Downloads folder. Take that. And we're going to drop it into our book. And what I want you to do is create a fonts folder. Drop that zip file in there. Open that up. And now we have both Roboto and Droid Serif as a combo. Now, if you've never installed Type before, it's really easy to do. You just double click on it and it'll say to install that font. Pretty straightforward. So I recommend just double click all of these and install all of Roboto and all of Droid Serif. And again, this is my choice for my first typographic pairing for my book. Doesn't mean that you have to pick Roboto and Droid Serif. So again, this resource is pretty awesome because you can come just download the font pair that you want and it already connects to Google for you and downloads it and you're ready to go. And again, it has tons and tons and tons of examples, and you can also filter by a mood and even a style. If you just wanted to use a sans serif, it'll filter by sans serif alone. So again, start with this resource. Try to see if you can find a pairing or two that will work for you. The overall goal is to find 3 pairings. Again, 3 pairings that you think you can experiment with when you're building your book. So on the other 2 trendy Google font and more Google font pairings, they don't have this wonderful feature of being able to download the font pair. So what you'll have to do is you go to the link, or if you find your own examples out there, you probably have to write down the 2 typefaces. Then there's a link for Google Fonts under Type Resource, and you're simply going to have to search for that typeface on Google Fonts. So if I look up, can't even say that, XR, I'll see it here. And then I can just simply add it, and it's kind of like a shopping cart. And when I'm done adding all the typefaces I want, I can download it, and I'll kick it out and download it. And then it's the same process as before. You'll have the downloaded file here, drop it in your fonts folder, expand the zip file, and install the typeface. So again, we have to get the type downloaded and installed before we go into doing the type pairing and creating our next spread. So make sure you do these steps before you continue on with the lesson. Okay, let's work on our 4th spread. Right now you're probably looking at your spread 3 and you have 5 versions of it, what I want you to do is pick your best version based on how you set the paragraph type. Now that can be left align or justified, and also what you think was the best solution for your header and your subdescription text here, along with how you've placed this image. So just pick the best one and get rid of the other 4. The next step is to take this copy and paste it into our next layout. So this will be our spread 4. Once you've done that, just as a quick reminder, always try to have the same alignment for your typography. So it's set here, it's also set in the same place on our previous 2 spreads. So consistency, consistency, and consistency. The reason why we copied and pasted is so we can keep the header and also our settings for how we've worked with our paragraph. So once you've done that, you can put in your new project title, new subdescription, and also the overall description for that project. So you still have to write this. We're just copying and pasting to keep the styles set. In this lesson, we are going to cover doing a multiple image spread. Now we're only going to work with 2 images, and we'll work in the 3 and 4 and 5 in later lessons, but we're just going to do 2 today. Now that could be horizontal or vertical, that's your choice. The 2 I'm going to be working with are vertical images. So I'm just going to import them, or Command D, select them, and what I'll do is it'll place it, and you can see right now the images are too big for the spread. So I'm going to hold Shift and Command, select both, and simply scale them down. So I'm just going to keep with kind of the centered alignment, both vertically and horizontally for now. The main thing I want everybody to see is that your alignment is perfect. So again, both of these images are exactly the same height, are aligned at the top and also aligned at the bottom. The one thing we don't want is just little miscues where like one image is offset, and that again just creates a little bit of tension. So find 2 images that are the same size so that you can put a nice clean spread together. The one thing that you can work with, and you've heard me talk to everybody about in our previous spreads, is margins. So that's the space around the image itself. So you have a couple choices that you can work with. You can either do a very wide margin and try to keep it consistent, so something like where this margin is almost equal to this and this. Right now I'm just a tad bit off. Or you can work with your margins being really, really tight together and presenting the image something like this. Now that choice is up to you as the designer. You can choose. My biggest input is just making sure that when you put the 2 images on the page, that it is presenting to its best possibility. So again, margin and alignment are the 2 key things here. Making kind of these 2 images perfectly aligned is key. Once we've made the decision of this margin between the images here, that same margin we'll use on other spreads. And if you look at the student example, let me see if I can open that up really quick. Zoom out and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. So the same margin used on the multiple image spread here, see how it's consistent throughout? It's consistent in height and it's also consistent in width, and we're going to get the spreads where we use 4 to 5 images. But again, alignment and margin are really key. I'll show you another example where she uses the same exact margin on another multiple image. Bear with me. That same margin is used in this spread as well. So again, once you've introduced this margin, think about how you're consistently going to use that spacing in your multiple images spreads in the future. Okay, let's work with some type. Just like previous spreads, what we want to do is create 5 versions. So just going to copy and paste. So Command C. If you click on the spread, Shift Option Command V, which pastes in place. And we're just going to do that a few more times. Again, make sure you click on the spread so it pastes on that specific spread. So now I have 5 versions of my layout, just like before. If you wanted to experiment with your margins and the overall size, I highly recommend just doing little tweaks to see how you can get the best image layout as possible. So again, you can come through and just do little tweaks here. And when you print it, you can see which one you like the best. So with the type, just like before, we're going to do 5 versions of type pairings. So if you don't have 5 chosen, jump back to the options on the class canvas and go under resources for pairing type and click on these options here. Again, the first option allows you to automatically download that font pairing. So I'm going to work with number 9. Again, you don't have to use number 9 for your layout example. It's just my example. So again, make sure you have 5 sets downloaded. I have number 9 downloaded, I have number 10, and I have number 12 so far. So again, 5 different pairing sets is what we're going to be laying out. Now I'm not going to lay out 5 different sets. I'm just going to show you how to do one, and then you can lay out the rest yourself. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to select the type like we would before and mimic what the layout is. So on number 9, I'm using Roboto Light, something similar to this scale, and it's all caps, which is similar to what I've designed. So if I come in here, choose Roboto and use light, maybe I will bump that size up just a little bit more, maybe the 21, since I'm using a light. And just make sure my box is large enough so I can see my type. In my body text, they're using Droid Serif Regular, so you can kind of mimic what they have there. So Droid Serif Regular, and if you type it in here, it jumps to the typeface a lot faster. I'm going to select Droid Serif Regular. And this is my first example. I want to also make sure I change this typeface. And I'm going to just pick Roboto again so it matches. Just going to use regular. So you can see, again, this looks great here, but in my combo, I've lost a little bit of my hierarchy, mainly because of the weight in the header. So what I'm going to do is, this is a great starting point. I think the paragraph type looks nice. My sub description with the date and the type looks good, but my header lost, honestly, some of the weight. So I'm just going to come in here and see, well, what's it look like if it's set in medium. And that's not too bad. I might actually now push that type size back down to about 18. And I have a combo that looks something like this. So again, when I change my paragraph type, sometimes the actual rag changes a little bit. So you see I have a widow here, and also so on justification, if I just pull it out a little bit, help it re-rag so I get the best possible paragraph. So that's my first example. What I want you to do is now come in and plug in other type combination pairings. So that's my first. Plug in a second, a third, and a fourth. And I think you kind of get it from there. So once you've done your 5 typographic combination examples with playing with your 2 images, trying to get them to lay out in the spread, what we'll want to do is do a save as. So Shift Command S, or go under File and do a save as. In your BYOB folder, we're just going to do a V4, which matches our 4th spread. Hit save. And now we have that file backed up. Again, we do versions just so if you end up not liking something, or if your file corrupts, you can always go back to a previous version. So once you're done, just like our last spreads, you'll want to do a PDF export. When you do that, you'll want to use your username, A4, book version 4, and do a save. You want to do all the pages, hit export. Remember, it takes a little while because it has to render out. And once it does that, you'll go to our assignment 4 and upload that to our Google Drive. The link isn't here. I'll put it up there before you work on it. Our lesson has now come to an end. This lesson covered working with type, specifically type classifications of serif and sans serif, a little bit of typographic history, understanding how to pick type, not based on style, but on typographic tone, and trying to understand its personality and how it might relate back to your illustration. And then lastly, pairing type using Google Fonts and how to apply that to creating a multiple image spread. I wish you all the best of luck in your spreads and layouts, and happy designing.